Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, despite the acknowledgement by the Interagency Standing Committee in 2008 that a human rights-based approach shall guide disaster risk mitigation, including pre-disaster mitigation and preparedness measures, little has been done to bridge and raise awareness about the added value of human rights law to ensure mainstreaming of DRR in governmental activities. The system of human rights as a legal framework is continuously developing, thanks both to increasing voluntary commitments undertaken by states and through the improvement of means of implementation. It represents an appropriate tool to promote the implementation by states of the principles of the Hyogo Framework for Action in the field of disaster risk reduction, as I shall briefly expand in my intervention. Natural disasters and conflicts affect directly the enjoyment of fundamental human rights. As a matter of fact, destroyed shelters, lack of food, and illness, all these realities impact directly the enjoyment of fundamental human rights of affected populations, such as the right to housing, the right to food, the right to health, the right to water, and sanitation. In other words, there can be no enjoyment of human rights without integration of the DRR component within state activities. In this context, it is therefore important to assert that the principles of the Hyogo Framework for Action can be interpreted as principles of implementation of the three categories of obligations that states are required to comply with respect to the enjoyment of all human rights, namely, the obligation to respect, to protect, and to fulfill basic human rights. The obligation to respect can require states to make sure they do not prevent humanitarian workers to access the beneficiaries. The obligation to protect requires states to ensure that DRR is a national priority, like the Hyogo Framework for Action requires. The obligation to fulfill requires states to allocate budget resources and allocate those resources also to those states that don't have enough. It also requires that budget cuts may be needed if the priority of the implementation as a matter of human rights is acknowledged. Further, human rights obligations of states have a clear impact in terms of processes, procedures, and institutions. Human rights procedural right guarantees can require states to inform, provide adequate education of their populations. They can also require populations' involvement in the development of policies, as well as the monitoring of their implementation through effective accountability mechanisms. As a conclusion, DRR can become a matter of complying with legal commitments signed upon under international law. And governments cannot simply take a few steps without clearly presenting how DRR fits into the overall development strategy of the country. WaterLex, in conjunction with the global network of civil society organizations for disaster risk reduction, therefore appeals to governments to acknowledge that the DRR component is within their obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill basic human rights of their local population. And secondly and finally, the acknowledgement of and mainstreaming of a human rights-based approach to improve the implementation and efficiency of the DRR legal, policy, and institutional framework. I thank you very much.